Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets fall at home to the Celtics, but should it be enough that this team was able to make it interesting late? We talk about the key sequences, the balance for Cam Thomas on both ends, and how they carry this over heading up to Boston. We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. Thank you, as always, man, even after a loss, for making us your first listen today. We're free on all those great platforms. And Doug, 118-110. The Nets lose to the Celtics, but in a game that very much felt like it could have been a 20-plus point blowout, and was, for much of this one, turned out to be pretty interesting in the fourth quarter. I asked it at the top. Is that enough to hang your hat on when you're taking on a team as good as the Boston Celtics are?
I mean, is it enough? No. It's at home. This is still a team full of professionals. They need the Nets need to win every game basically from here to the end of the season. It's not going to be realistic, but they really can't take any games off. That being said, when it looks like they're dead and buried, down 20 plus points, to fight all the way back, within single digits, 6 points and get y'all there with with an interesting rotation that was kind of built to make a push.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think there's positives to take away from the game. And I think we have plenty of positives to take away, understanding that this is probably the best team in basketball. I mean, sans Kristaps Porzingis, but ultimately, no, a loss is a loss. But yeah, I'm saying, but 5 times in here, it's a loss. And at the same time, yeah, I think there's pieces that we can look at this and say, hey, I can kind of envision how this will work. If we didn't get buzzsawed by Tatum for 41 points, right, before it was all said and done.
And that's what I think. Again, there's on the one hand, you look at it and go, even if you feel like you're outmatched against a team like the Celtics, you don't want to give up 8-0 runs and 6-0 runs in the first quarter. You don't want to give up 11-0 runs in the second quarter, right? These big spurts where, again, we've talked about wanting to be able to hang your hat on the defensive end at times. I don't know if you can do that against some teams that have Jayson Tatums and have Jaylen Browns and have outside shooters in White, now Horford, right? And all these players that they can come at you with. So obviously it makes it a difficult task. And then sometimes it ends up feeling a little bit almost deflating to have them come back in the fourth quarter like they did and cut the lead to 6, and then say ultimately you don't get over that hump. And this always becomes the chicken or the egg. Is it that the Celtics had the game so in hand for so much of it that they get a little bit lackadaisical, play with their food, so to speak, and the Nets get back into it? Or that if the Nets could have been in a little bit better rhythm early, this could have been more of a dogfight for the first 3 quarters?
Yeah, I'm glad you put it that way, because the truth is probably somewhere in between, and it's probably a little closer to Celtics let go of the rope, right? And the Nets are able to, and because we just watch, if you watch enough basketball, this is just what happens, right? One team's just a little more incentivized than the other. One team understands that they're up 20 plus points, takes their foot off the gas a little bit. I mean, a lot of that run or much of that run was with Tatum on the bench, right? So, which is good. You should make hay when the other team's best player is off, but it's a combo deal. Tatum's on the bench, they can go into cruise control for a bit. It's never that close, right? And then all of a sudden they lose. So I think there's different ways to sort of analyze how the game ends up being played out. But I think that if you watch the whole game, this is probably just the result most times you run it, right? They are overmatched. There were some little things that got in the way. I know people were furious with the refereeing early in this game. And, there was some missed calls for sure. It's not why they lost the game at all. But I think you phrasing it like that, is it more, pro Nets or anti-Celtics or whatever way it is? I think it's a little more Celtics sort of understood the spot they were in, and the Nets really, really pushed, and it still wasn't enough.
Yeah, I thought one of the things that also maybe encapsulated it too was that Jaylen Brown had no fouls in the first half and then had 5 fouls by the fourth quarter, picked up 3 in the first, I think 3 minutes of the third quarter. And it was for a player of his caliber, especially on the defensive end as well, that also I think speaks to, I'm going to take one here. Maybe I'm going to take one here. And then even to your point, the referees who I thought were maybe heavily leaning one way in the first half, gave a few back in the second half, which is always the last thing you want, just inconsistent and kind of pendulum swinging momentum like that. But that felt like it too. Sometimes you look at things like that as being an indicator about where a player is, maybe as well, when we'll get into here in a second, Cam Thomas, and as he starts to get going in the second half, you are also, if you're the Boston Celtics, willing to take some fouls to kind of cool things off a little bit, to slow things down. And as we know, the end of the first half was an absolute grind with Hack-a-Ben and Hack-a-Nick. And, listen, it's a part of the game. You accurately said over on Twitter, if you make your free throws, that kind of solves that problem. Unfortunately, the Nets have two guys that aren't really adept at doing that. So in the end, the Brooklyn Nets do come up a bit short when it comes to the Boston Celtics.
Real quick, I know people took Maz to town a little bit on that because it's like, oh, it's a regular season game. You're really going to do it this way. And from a product standpoint, is a Hacka Simmons and Hacka Clax a fun way to watch basketball? No, there's lots of things that the NBA sort of said is okay, like, grifting fouls. Is that fun to watch when those guys do it? No, horrible. It's an F- product. That being said, it's in the game. And if you're going to take advantage of it, it's like hard to blame a coach for doing it. The Nets have two bad free throw shooters on their team. If I was trying to win every game and trying to squeeze every ounce of EV out of like a chance to win, I would do the same exact thing. Now, from a product standpoint, I would vote 10 fingers straight down, like about whether or not I'd rather want to watch that or not. It's horrible to watch. But if you shoot 75% from the free throw line, no one will foul you. So it's on you to go make the foul shots. Like, these guys can't make foul shots. They've never been able to, especially Simmons. And this is just what happens. So I can't blame Missoula. It just sucks that that's part of the game. Anyway, sorry to go long rant on the Hackett thing, but it ended up becoming like an interesting thing. Like, you don't see it a lot, and we could see that a lot more for the Nets, frankly.
Well, I was going to say, and that was the other high-level thing before we get into some individual performances, is that we know the Nets roster is still not perfectly constructed, right? You start with Ben Simmons and Claxton on the floor together. We always say, hey, most teams are going to go, who are our best five players? We're going to start them. Unfortunately, when it comes to Brooklyn, starting your best five players puts you into difficult spots, and then even when you try to break them up, it still presents the same problem. They're hacking Ben, you take him out, you put in Nick. Okay, then we're going to hack him, right? If you go down to Day'Ron Sharpe, even though he's better at the line, you're probably going to hack him too. So the Nets just have this issue inside of their roster, and you anticipate teams like Boston taking advantage of that. Most teams are going to take advantage of that, even if it feels like you shouldn't be able to. Guess what? NBA rules allow it, and so every team should take advantage of it, as I would want the Nets to do as well. We're it the other way. Coming up here in a second, let's talk about Cam Thomas. He got absolutely picked on defensively. We expect that in a lot of games. He is the weakest link on that end of the floor, but without him, this is not a second half that we're talking about as anything other than a total dumpster fire. We'll dive in on the balance on both ends coming up next.
All right, going to make myself feel a lot better here. I'll tell you about our friends over at Hungry Root. Look, when it comes to grocery shopping, you want to go to the store. You're doing meal planning. Sometimes it's like dietary stuff can get in the way. Price can get in the way. Just staying healthy can get in the way. This is where Hungry Root steps in and helps you check all of those boxes. It's your partner in healthy living. Easiest way to get fresh, high-quality groceries and simple, healthy recipes delivered right to your door. It's super convenient. All you got to do over at Hungry Root, you take a fun little short quiz. They're going to get to know your personal health goals, what you like to eat, the kitchen appliances you use. All of that stuff's going to go in to your Hungry Root box. Hungry Root's going to recommend recipes and groceries based on your personal taste. Each order is completely and fully customizable. You can take the suggestions or just choose anything you want over at Hungry Root. This follows a simple standard. It's got to taste good. It's got to be quick to make. It's got to contain whole, trusted ingredients. Hungry Root has you covered right across the bases when it comes to your grocery shopping. Right now, Hungry Root is offering Locked On Nets listeners 40% off your first delivery, and get this one, free veggies for life. Go to hungryroot.com/lockedon. Grab 40% off your first delivery. Grab those free veggies for life. That's hungryroot.com/lockedon. Don't forget to use that link so they know we sent you. hungryroot.com/lockedon.
All right, so as we continue the post game here on a Tuesday night, the Brooklyn Nets coming up short 118-110 to the Boston Celtics. They'll go right back at them tomorrow night, but up in Boston at the Garden. So that should be, as we said, projecting last episode, can this team maybe be in that play-in tournament conversation? The next 10 games, including the loss tonight, we thought they could go 6-4, and we included losing these two games against Boston. Maybe something that can go different is how the game starts for Cam Thomas. Listen, I said it there in the last segment. Cam Thomas that's going to be the guy they try to switch onto. He is the weakest assignment. And in a game like this, there are really difficult cross matchups that can be created against him. That being said,
well, basically all of them.
By some, I mean every single matchup that you can get him into is going to be plus. And it's
with this group. Sorry to keep cutting you off, but specifically with this group, they have 5 guys that can take it to you, and there's a reason the Celtics are great. Sorry to cut you off there, but I just wanted to clarify that like this specific one is going to be a particular challenge.
Yeah, and it's always brutal when you see Cam Thomas underneath the basket trying to front Jayson Tatum, right? Like, it's just, hey, guys, this is not the design here. Players that are of the same size and of the same skill set or, near the same tier as Jayson Tatum are going to struggle in those types of matchups. So I don't even really want to dwell on it too much. I'm actually just going to, I hate to go silver lining here, but it's, yes, you're losing this game. You're down by 20 plus, and you can point to Cam Thomas defensively and say, man, he's going to get picked on all night. It's going to be brutal. Well, guess what? If you don't have him, then you're not coming back because that's what he is. He's a bucket getter. And there's not a lot of ways to mitigate that. They tried to do a better job in the second half of protecting Cam Thomas against those matchups. The issue there is it created so many open looks because ball movement and spacing, it's just really hard to be shading over towards those matchups all game long and not find yourself trying to scramble on closeouts. And that becomes part of Cam Thomas's responsibility as well. So just a really difficult thing to adjust to here for the Nets.
Yeah, they tried to keep the high man as much as they could. The Celtics were looking to pick it off on different switches, and then even when they would get those mucked up a little bit, the guy who was going to tag the help coming through the lane on the Cam Thomas switch, would get caught a little too far in, and the Celtics would get wide open threes, right? So it's just going to be a functional problem for them going forward. It's something you're just going to have to live with. I think Cam's defensive effort has been better. He's been boxing out, he's been trying to close out, he's been trying to get his body into some of these guys. It's just going to be such a tough assignment, and unfortunately these other teams just have the book on it at this point where they want to find him as much as possible. And if you're a team that's hacking, playing those kind of edges, doing hack of Simmons, you're definitely going to be calling him out. Right. But at the same time, like you said, the Nets have to be okay with it, of course, because the scoring is so elite that this is going to be what it is. So basically what they just need to do is play less smart teams with fewer guys that they can punish, that can punish this particular matchup. The Celtics are a bad matchup because you have Tatum, you have Brown, you have Holiday, you have White, even Horford too. If Cam gets into the low man situation, then he's smart enough to put a body him and put him into the basket. Right. So it's just a really, really tough matchup. There's a reason the Celtics, thank God Staps wasn't around. It's just such a tough matchup, and they're going to isolate, sort of weaker defenders. On the other side of the ball, Cam's literally the only reason they were in the game. They made high degree difficulty shots, got the 1 3-pointer taken away, which, by the way, have you ever heard of that happening before? The 3-pointer that gets negated. He had a 3-pointer that they reviewed to see if it was a 3-pointer, and they ended up calling him that he was stepping out of bounds. I can't remember having seen that before.
I've seen the retroactive on, his foot was on the line, so it's a 2, not a 3, right?
Agree with that
go
one.
back and do that. It's interesting because my initial response would be, yeah, of course I've seen that, because they go back and review it. But I'm thinking of on the line or not, 2 points or 3 points. The out of bounds one is interesting, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure it has, and I've just missed it. And maybe everyone's going to say, hey, it happens it's happened 100 times, and I've just missed it. I just didn't.
Well, I prefer that it didn't happen 100 times. I wish it was 99, and that one counted. It would have been a big difference.
Didn't ring a bell for me. Regardless, Cam, I think this is what you live with, and what you hope is that the game continues to expand. I think I think we've seen clearly for him, there's been major growth in his game this year. And I actually feel like the defensive thing will continue to get better too. But there's just going to be situations where it becomes really apparent.
Now, this was in a game, too. You mentioned that's 26 points for Cam Thomas, 34 minutes, 10 to 20 from the field, 4 of 7 from deep, got to the line only a couple times. That's a hard one, too. And you could see he was also getting frustrated throughout this game. He took 5 personal fouls in this one, because he's giving you everything that he can on the defensive end. He's taking some fouls. And then on the offensive end, and we've talked about this before. Listen, Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, they're established. They're going to get those calls. Not only Cam Thomas, but the Nets collectively. They just don't have those guys that the borderlines go their way. Or when you see bodies bumping, especially against a team like Boston, you're going to say more often than not, well, that's because they're a great defensive team, right? Because they're always in really good positioning, as opposed to maybe there are some bodies getting bumped there. So there was definitely a frustration build here, I think, for Cam Thomas in that regard. But what I found interesting is also with that, Mikal Bridges goes identical, 10 for 20. Now he's 3 of 8 from deep, gets to the line 4 times. He gives you 27 points over his 40 minutes. So these guys combined for 53 points. And at one point in the first half, it was, well, you know that these guys need to give you, high level offensive performances to have a chance. They both end up rounding into that. But I will say that Cam Thomas's game ends up reading to me better. I don't know. Like, I want to ask you this question. Does Mikal Bridges, when you look at the box score, you go, really? 10 for 20, 50% from the field, solid from beyond the arc. Like, all of a sudden his box score added up. Now he struggled a little bit early after getting the initial feed from Ben Simmons, which felt like a great start on the perimeter shot. But sometimes, again, we've said this before, Mikal can blend into the game. And by the end of it, you get the numbers, but it doesn't feel like his fingerprints are on the game the same way that Cam's was in the second half.
It's a great call. Actually, I guess I just hadn't even looked at this part of the box score, because they really do have like nearly identical box scores. Yeah. But if you went and looked at the game without seeing anything, you would have, I think everyone would have voted that Cam had a much bigger impact on the offensive end. Right. Now, some of the Mikal stuff came a little earlier in the game too. And so the part where it's front of mind ends up becoming a little more on Thomas. Thomas's stuff ends up becoming a little more memorable too, because again, the degree of difficulty is higher. So it just looks harder. I mean, and it is harder. He's smaller. It's harder for him to get shots, right? Like the kinds of shots that he takes are more difficult. I agree with you though. Like stylistically, one is just going to lend himself to being a bit more memorable than the other. It is a shame when you look back at this game to see that these guys shot 50% from the floor, right? 7 for 50, basically 47% from 3, and combined for 53 points. To get those kinds of games from these guys and lose is a tough pill to swallow, because those are the kinds of games the Nets desperately kind of need to win when you have your 2 best scorers and they're pretty darn efficient for the game. Like, those are the ones you look back and you're like, oh man, that hurts, because we're not going to get that kind of efficiency every night. And I think it will be better with Simmons around, because he does lend itself to like getting these guys into better spots. I think Schroeder's going to help there too. But yeah, looking at the box score, watching the game, seeing that these guys were mostly making their shots, and to lose is tough. And yeah, if you had to vote, if it was a blind taste test here, you'd be like easily choosing Cam Thomas each time with who was better from the offensive standpoint. I don't think it's all that close.
Coming up here in a second, then, not only let's talk about maybe a key factor, just getting Dorian Finney-Smith back into the fold, just getting Day'Ron Sharpe back into the fold, and also that little man named Jalen Wilson, rookie, putting on a bit of a performance for himself, trying to make the case that he deserves to stay inside of the rotation. What did these key factors play? And ultimately, the Nets coming up short. We'll dive into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, we'll tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. If you're into speed, you're into power, you're into style, it doesn't matter. eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP. Bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we continue the post-game podcast here for the Locked On Nets crew, 118-110, the Nets fall at home to the Celtics. We remind you, head over to wegotnets.com and you can get your hands on a free ebook. That's 5 stories in 5 days from the Brooklyn Nets history. Got Jayson Kidd in the mix there, the end of the superstar era that wasn't in a lot of ways. 100% free for you. Sign up with your email and be tapped in when we roll out some additional content that you're going to be really excited to be a part of. wegotnets.com for that free ebook. Now, the other thing here, the Nets are getting blown out by 20 for a lot of this game. But when you tap back into this box score and you see only 19 minutes for Dorian Finney-Smith, I said just getting his legs back underneath him. Day'Ron Sharpe only plays 9. I'll tell you right now, his legs are not fully underneath him because there were a handful of rebounds on the defensive glass that normally he is up there and claiming them. Instead, it was a mild elevation and trying to fend guys off with his body. I think that played a factor as well. But we talk about just briefly in the paint. I that felt like this was a big factor here. And if you look at those two players, even specifically, and the value you're normally going to get from them on a minutes to minute basis, you just couldn't depend on them in this one. Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy that has defensive versatility, might have been able to help mitigate some of that risk with Cam Thomas. You saw this in the first half when they went small ball lineup, him at the 5, brought in Lonnie, brought in Schroeder, brought in DSJ, and just tried to surround shooters and space out and break down that zone from the Celtics.
Yeah, those guys, it's a little weird about DFS's minutes, only 19 in this one. You think he'd be kind of ramping back up here into like mid 20s. It didn't help that Claxton really had a kind of a rough game here on the defensive end too.
Yeah.
So they just kind of struggled in the interior. Again, they were
Didn't
running.
help, by the way, that I was going back at, I listened to Brian Scalabrine call Nicholas Claxton just an average center.
Yeah.
And that got me a little fueled up. And then he went out and had a very average performance. So it didn't help.
And they took advantage of the switching scheme to kind of get him out of some of those actions, right? Like they have guys that they don't need to just kind of run themselves into a Claxton switch, and they didn't. And like, it's going to be a little hard to help when you're that spaced out. And they just ended up kind of mitigating the things that he does really, really well. Again, this is a tough matchup. I don't totally blame him, but they really needed probably some secondary rim protection here, and they just weren't able to get out. Again, some of it was scheme. Some of it was just like the way the Nets were kind of choosing to defend it, which I think was switching. Like they should be doing that, but this was just ends up being like they're going to avoid Claxton, and I would too. Like if you have all the guys to pick from on the Nets and you can get them into different actions, Claxton's the last one you want to get there. So kind of a rough game for him. I'm hoping we see these DFS minutes tick up here a little bit more. I mean, now it's giving us more Jalen Wilson, so I think that's good, but I'd like to see a little bit more. Maybe that happens next game. Ben Simmons already ruled out for the second half of the back-to-back, so he's not going to play. So maybe we see Dorian. Maybe they were kind of saying like, hey, 19 tonight because we know you're going to play more like 26, 27 tomorrow. That can make sense to me if that's the case. And they're really going to need his size, especially if Kristaps Porzingis is back in.
And it looks like we got Cam Johnson preparing to come back for tomorrow night's game as well. So the Nets are getting back. We said getting healthy at the right time here, hopefully. And you mentioned there too about the low minutes for Dorian Finney-Smith. When you look inside the bench, I think this is also the reminder, right? Like it's a quiet night for Dennis Smith Jr. Even as a good defensive player, it's going to be a hard matchup for him. Lonnie Walker, yes, 17 minutes, good shooting, gives you 15 points. Schroeder, 3 of 10 from the field, but had the assist, had the rebound. So it provided the kind of impact that you're hoping for. But if you're fully healthy and DFS is good, then you're thinking, let's reduce some of the minutes on our smaller backcourt players. Let's ramp up some of the bigger bodies that we have, which brings us to Jalen Wilson. Now, again, Johnson will come back tomorrow. Maybe that plays a factor here. DFS gets more minutes as he ramps up. Maybe that plays a factor here. But you cannot overlook, and we talked about this a few episodes ago, and then maybe had to dial it back when we thought about 240. But when you look back now, he's played 23 minutes tonight, played 30, played 40, played 18 going back to the Dallas game. Now the team collectively has lost 3 out of those 4. But he's playing good basketball for this team. He's knocked down 2 of 3. That's his average. He knocks down 2 out of 3 from beyond the arc. He was perfect 3 for 3 tonight. So, I mean, he's hitting an electric 67%. He can't maintain that. But he has the nose for the ball. He's giving you a couple assists per game, giving you 4+ rebounds per game, edging around double digits. And he doesn't seem like, the best thing I can say in a game like this, which is a really tough matchup, he didn't look outmatched. He understood where he needed to be on the floor. I thought he did a good job, or as good as a job you can do defensively, and made the right smart plays on the offensive end. If you clear out Royce O'Neal, even though you have other players in the mix here, it does look like he should maintain some level of a role that is consistent. I don't know what the minute share is, but it's hard for me to unsee it. I can't unsee Jalen Wilson looking like he is an NBA rotational player.
I'm going to correct you on one thing, buddy, but the tenor is going to remain the same. He's shooting 55% from 3. He's 11 for 20 on the season.
Over the last 4 games, Douglas, how dare you?
Gotcha, my bad. But good news here. That is good for we've got players that have taken more than 15 attempts in the NBA this year. That ranks second in the league in 3-point shooting so far. Sample sizes, we don't care. We don't care about sample sizes when they work in our favor. So
no way.
if he's going to be able, I mean, look, he's not going to shoot 55%.
3-point shooting contest, all-star break, Jalen Wilson.
Put him in, he'll win. But like, if you can come out of the gate, my biggest thing with him is he looks confident, right?
Yeah.
Now it's easy to be confident when you make all your shots. And so I think that like that is helpful, but he is able to pull it for a rookie who has not played that much, and it really didn't really project as like this kind of guy. I don't think, being able to have like a pretty quick trigger on the catch and shoot threes and be able to hold up just enough on defense. Like that's really kind of the story for like being able to make a kind of a career in the NBA for a guy like in his archetype. Right. And so the fact that he's come out of the box and being able to make the threes, it makes you instantly forget about Royce. I mean, right away. Yep. Right. And so I like that's because this is exactly what O'Neal will do. It's like literally the exact same thing. A little bit of ball handling, make the threes, and be able to switch on the fours if you need to get there on defense. And like, that's it. And so I think I guess I was the one that put it out there totally wrong about what the minutes were going to be. I thought like they would not be able to find minutes for him as they started to get healthier. That was just incorrect. So, and in a good way. And I'm glad to be wrong here. So it looks like they're going to really prioritize finding minutes for him. And I think that's like a really good sign for where the Nets are sort of like on a development track with him.
And when you draft a guy at 22 years old, right, you know he's going to be 23. Like you, this has to be, again, we're pleasantly surprised, specifically around the 3-point shooting that it's been able to come on so quickly, because it seemed like everything was. And if this can get up to par, transitioning from college, transitioning from Kansas into the NBA, then great. So the fact that it's there now, then this falls into the category of Sean Marks and the scouting department seeing a player in the second round, older player, but feeling like the floor is there. The ceiling is probably higher than you or I projected when they first drafted him, but now get him into the game, right? And this is the both and. We understand this team still wants to make the play-in tournament, wants to be in the playoffs. Okay, great. But you cannot overlook developing a player like this, because we don't want to be here a year from now saying, well, if only Jalen Wilson was getting 15, 20 minutes a game for the last 30 of the season. Now he can have that. And then off season, maybe about a Dorian Finney-Smith, right? If there are offers, if you're trying to make a swing on another player, you know where you stand on some of these role guys. And just a last quick note on him. He knocked down with 2:49 to go off the Cam Thomas assist. It was his triple that made a 111-105 and cut it to the closest the Nets got, a 6-point lead, a deficit. That's clutch shooting, right? That is in the big spot, as you mentioned. Royce O'Neal could always count on to knock down one of those. That's a guy that doesn't feel like the moment is too big for him. You need players like that because it's always going to be a rotation. Sometimes Lonnie Walker is going to be on great. Sometimes Schroeder will be awesome. But there's going to be the nights when someone has to step up. And if he can fill that role, it can matter for this team over the last 29.
And look, and we've been saying they're getting healthier, but they're still not 100%. You know, Simmons is going to sit out this Wednesday game. We can just pretty much factor in that some of these guys are going to get tweaked along the way, just because that's sort of what happened with where they are. So knowing that knowing he's there is like a pretty good stabilizing force, and he should be able to play minutes. And if we're trying to think about guys that have been like quasi rotation guys and we weren't sure where they're going to go, like think back to Kessler Edwards, right? Second round pick. Kind of flashed for times, got to start here and there. And we were like, oh, what can he do? But it kind of never really materialized. I think this is sort of a different situation than Edwards. Like Kessler, I mean, well, one, Jalen Wilson can dribble, but it just looks like there's a little more fluidity to the game. It looks like there's just a little more sort of like belongs there. And it's not just sort of stand in the corner, play some help, some weak side help. And like, that's kind of what you're going to do. Yep. It does look like there's a little bit more to his game. And I think that's why you're going to see the minutes sort of like stay hopefully around this, probably a little less, but around this range.
Yeah, and listen, Pepperdine versus Kansas, right? Pedigree of college, pedigree of prospect, and then ultimately, no knock on Kessler Edwards. But to your point, the eye test, you wanted to push against it and have him get there, but you had that creeping feeling he wasn't going to. The eye test for Jalen Wilson says, oh, I don't know if he's going. Oh, nope, sorry. Looks like he is going to get there, right? So you're the optimism and confidence is building as opposed to waning when you think about a guy like Edwards. No disrespect. Found himself a nice little.
Kessler Edwards like, hey, how did I get factored into this? Okay, we are going to get out of here. No YouTube live questions after the game tonight. We'll do that tomorrow night after the second half of the back-to-back. Really appreciate everyone that's in here on the YouTube live, and I know usually we stick around for a few extra questions, but tonight we're going to break out early, and we will do a longer one tomorrow night after hopefully
after Nets win.
after a win against the Celtics up there in Boston. In the meantime, go grab that free ebook. There's also, if you want to reach out too, there's a form on the website. You can just leave a message. If there's other stories you want to see for the Nets, go over to the forum, go to the contact us on wegotnets.com. Leave us a message and let us know some other stuff because we're getting other stuff coming down the pike. Wegotnets.com.
The best things in life are free. The second best things are very, very expensive. That's Coco Chanel.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.